Welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm Sara, and with me today is Miriam Dumitra, and she's the author of BRIGHTSHADE, Tales of Aether and Soul, the first book in the series, which so far I'm reading and I absolutely love. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about BRIGHTSHADE and your inspiration for the first book in the series?
Okay, so BRIGHTSHADE started out when I was trying to basically just write a magic system. That was the only goal. I read all these really cool magic systems and I wanted to make my own and make it really in depth. And that's kind of how the book started. And then it kind of got a lot bigger from there. Yeah, I just started writing and world building and it kind of took over 5 years of my life. And then I had a book. Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
I love it when stuff sort of gets away from you, like, oh, you're just sort of daydreaming, and then suddenly it's like, 300 words later, or 300,000 usually more.
Sounds about right.
So you have multiple characters and you sort of bounce between them. I think 5 points of view. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's really fun, and I mean that's the case with a lot of more epic fantasy novels. Was that something that was hard for you to juggle all those different voices, because you really nail the different voices? Like I have no question when I'm reading, like,
sweet.
Which side am I in right now?
I'm really glad to hear that. It was difficult to nail. Basically, I think a lot of my inspiration for this, like the POV, like dividing up the point of views, came from Brandon Sanderson and what he does in his series Stormlight Archive. Just the way that book began, and I wasn't entirely sure whose book it was yet, and then only later did I really settle on, okay, this is the main character, this is the secondary main character. I just loved that feeling, and it just made the fantasy world feel so big and in depth. So that's kind of a little bit my inspiration for the 5 characters, and then I tried to write that. But sometimes it was tricky. Like sometimes I would have to just write one character's perspective that day because I had to be in their voice, or then I needed to switch perspectives and I needed to put on music to make myself think of that character, so I could really get into their head again and make sure I was being true to their voice. Because I tried to make them all different enough that you can always tell, which character you're in right now, which character's head you're in, I guess.
I definitely have had to go back and be like, okay, so, because I'll have different dialects with my characters too. And it's like, okay, so who's saying shit and who's saying shite?
Yes.
And things like that, which is like the thing you never think you're going to have to do as a writer.
Yeah, I chose some words where I was like, oh, I'm going to give these words, but only these words, a little bit of an accent just to make the character's actual like vocal voice different. And I personally, I liked it. Me and my main beta reader, we decided it was like, it was Newfie English for them. It was like the equivalent of them having a Newfie accent. But I think some readers found it was a little bit confusing because I didn't quite understand the accent thing. So still working on that one.
Yeah, that's always hard too, because it's like, do you want to go like full drama with like saying ye instead of you or whatever it happens to be? And
yeah.
Because then you have to kind of commit to like, oh, am I going to write everyone's dialects, or am I just going to describe it a few times and go from there? Yeah, that's one of those fun writer things you have to work through.
Definitely.
So you mentioned obviously that the inspiration was based on a magic system. What type of magic system do you use? Because I mean, like I've gotten a glimpse of it, but for our listeners who haven't dived in yet.
Do you want the short explanation or the long? I guess there's 2 very different versions. I guess I'll just start by introducing it. So the magic system is based off of the concept of basically just trying to classify magic. So I thought of, oh, this is cool magic I've seen in movies and shows. I've read this in books. How could I organize this to make it more consistent? So basically in the books, the way it works is there are 3 sources of magic, and there are 3 types of powers. And each character with magic will have a combination of the 2, except for the outliers who kind of have wild magic that was kind of, repressed and then developed separately. And this is this weird, wild thing. So the 3 sources of magic, are a caster's body, an object the mage has, or some aspect of nature. And then the types of powers would be transformational powers. So whether that be like something like shape-shifting or something, I don't know, like transforming their eyesight so they can see in different ways, stuff like that. Just anything that's transformational. Then discipline magic, which I only touch on very briefly in the book, which is basically just gaining magical prowess with a skill. So like maybe you can like spit around corners. That's my favorite example. And the third one is to use elemental magic. And this is what my main character Jenna has. So I have the traditional elements of, fire, water, those kinds. But I also have Aether and Soul, which I kind of use as light and dark, basically. So Jenna has Aether and Soul magic, and her source is an aspect of nature, and she draws hers from death and destruction. So that's kind of the power to fuel this elemental magic.
I really enjoy when magic delves into those, like, you're drawing from something. It's, potentially a finite source, especially when it's like bringing in death and spirit or soul. That was something that I really loved in the Legend of Korra
Yes.
series, because they do bring in that when she's like spirit bending or whatever, and it's like that's something that's, elements are cool, but this is like a whole next level.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's neat too that you're weaving together these sort of three different distinct systems, because I think a lot of books will pick one and go with it, which is great. That's fun too. But definitely, it's something to it's kind of difficult to weave all three together.
Yeah, I think that's where you can see that I started with the magic system, because that was kind of my big thing. I saw these like kind of, I narrowed it down to these three threads, I guess, that I found, and I really just wanted to bring them together.
So you mentioned Jenna, who so far I love all the characters, but she's a little special to me.
Yeah.
So I use a cane a lot of the time to walk. And that's actually what drew me to your book in the first place, was I saw this cover and there was this woman and she's like got all this crazy magic, and that was cool. And I saw that she had crutches, and it's mentioned in the blurb as well. And I just, that's something you don't see very often. Especially, and obviously I haven't finished the book yet, but it's something that if you do see it, it's in a way that's like worked into the plot, whereas for her, it seems like it's definitely worked into the plot because it affects her, but it's not like the point. It's like casual disability is what I call it. So would you mind telling me a little bit about, no spoilers, your inspiration for having a disabled character like visibly on page, and just your process writing that?
I think this is a little bit difficult for me to answer because like I'm not a disabled person, so it's not my own experience of writing. So I always feel like I have to be really careful with this because I want to have good representation, but I want to make sure it's coming from a place of, honesty. I think with Jenner, when I wrote her character at the very, very beginning, she was able-bodied, I think, but it didn't work. Like it didn't quite feel right for her. And I think especially, I don't know, I guess I do see her inability to walk tied into the plot a little bit, not to say to the plot, but just to her magic. I think those two together are such an integral part of a character and the way they interact. And I think that was really important for me, that she needed something that to kind of almost offset the magic, or to make the magic make more sense for her character. I don't know if that really makes sense.
That works. I think that really works, because a lot of times, when as a disabled person, or anyone from any marginalized community really, when you say like, oh, well, just, change their skin color, or, change their gender, or change their sexuality or their ability. And if the plot doesn't change, then you're not writing it correctly. Because you're not making it part of their character, whether or not it's plot. Yeah, so that makes perfect sense. And I actually, cool. I had a similar experience with one of my characters. Now I'm a hearing person, but one of my characters is deaf, and was since she was born that way. And I had a very similar experience where I was writing her as a hearing person, and then like third draft in, I'm like, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so I totally get where you're coming from with that. Yeah.
Cool.
Did you have a sensitivity reader?
I didn't really. And it's something in hindsight that I wish that it did have. I had kind of I had three ways of writing her. One was honestly just my imagination. I'd read a few disabled characters, and I think maybe something like not being able to walk, I can imagine a lot more easily than, like, say, being deaf, for instance. I think there's just something I could imagine better there. Now, I did have an acquaintance who shattered something in her leg, and so she could not walk either for like a good couple months. And so I just kind of, asked her a couple casual questions about, what did she really notice? that she didn't think would have been such a big difference. And she was like, oh, things like I can't open doors, stuff like that. And then I think the third way I did, I posted my blurb on kind of a blurb review site.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, I got a couple people giving me some feedback specifically on Jenna from a disabled person perspective. And then that was really useful. For example, they suggested that I don't use the word crippled, which I think I used at the beginning a couple times. And they were like, okay, this could be an issue. So yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely, that's one of those words. It's like the word queer, which like I use the word queer and crippled for myself, but I would never use it for someone else. And I do get that it's like you're in this weird space where you're writing that character. So you're using their voice, but you are not that character. So you kind of have to tread that.
It's a fine line to tread, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I didn't realize that you hadn't had a sensitivity reader, so clearly you're doing a good job so far.
Wonderful. And I am planning on getting one for the second book. Yeah. Still working on finding who it's going to be, but it's definitely the plan.
Well, it's definitely, with the internet, I think sensitivity reading is becoming a lot more accessible.
Yes.
Because you can find so many people of these different experiences, but you can also fill in gaps when maybe it's not, a point of view character, it's just a side character, and you just want a few details. You can just listen to those communities in a much easier way because you can find them like on Twitter or, whatever social media you have. And that's definitely helped me a lot. And that's where I found my sensitivity reader for my deaf character. And yeah, because there's a lot of those people, they have communities online because it's hard to find communities in, in the real world. So that's awesome that you're working towards that. To sort of switch gears here. So you grew up in Romania and the Philippines. So
and Austria.
And Austria. Okay. No, that's everywhere. So how obviously our childhoods affect our writing. How has this affected your writing, especially because those are places you don't necessarily see in fantasy worlds a lot?
Yes. I think the cultures themselves have not necessarily made it into this book. But there's just the experience of traveling, and basically I was what they call a TCK, a third culture kid. So if you grow up in multiple cultures, you kind of take bits of each culture and you kind of appropriate them as your own, and you form this kind of weird, mutated, like, culture that's built out of all these other cultural elements. And that has always just really been part of my identity, and like not entirely feeling comfortable or at home in any one place because there's so many places that are home for me. And I think that's definitely made it into the mindset of some of these characters. I think particularly Imp, who travels a lot, and he just doesn't, I think he gravitates towards certain things that provide stability in his life. So he, the very first scene, minor spoiler here, I mean, he sets a fire. Yeah. And that's kind of his thing. That's what provides him with stability to kind of control his environment. Because other than that, he has no control. He's always moving from place to place, and he kind of takes bits and pieces, but doesn't really have a single place he calls home.
Child of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, he has this idealized notion, I think, of the town he came from, which has some truth to it because he did have a good life back there at one point, but it's also kind of this false image.
Yeah. That perfection of your childhood memories, for sure. It's like that never actually existed. But, in that sort of rose-tinted glass way, it does.
Exactly.
I think it's interesting too. A lot of writers who I've spoken to, they'll say that for whatever series of reasons, they had this loneliness growing up. And that's sort of why they gravitated towards writing, because they wanted to build a place where they belonged, or, maybe it wasn't as distilled a thought as that when they started writing, but as they got older and developed their craft, they realized that's what they were doing. And that sounds like exactly sort of where you're coming from. Like, you loved all these places, but you sort of have this not quite belonging, kind of belonging thing going on. Yeah,
I think that's a good way to describe it.
So you're also a blacksmith, which I just think is totally badass.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about that, which is a little bit, I mean, it's a creative thing. It's a creative work.
Yeah, totally. Basically, I did 4 years of woodworking in high school, and then after that, I did not know what I wanted to do. So my thought process went, I love working with my hands, I know woodworking. What if I can do something with wood and metal together? I'd always like loved, medieval stories growing up, and was always a blacksmith of the cool characters.
Mhm.
Um, so I actually found myself a program, and it was a fine arts program with specialization in blacksmithing. So I did that. And then after that, I got to go back to Austria, where I was born, and do some blacksmithing practicums there with some traditional Austrian blacksmiths. And it was really cool, and I learned so much. Yeah, it's not something I'm actively doing right now, just because I don't have a forge, because you kind of need a set location. But I'm definitely hoping to pick that up as soon as I can get a forge. Yeah.
That is so cool. The favorite character that I told you about before we were recording, whose name I was mispronouncing,
Yeah.
she's a blacksmith, and
Sweet.
it's something that I've always really loved the idea of, but like my body, I just probably couldn't do it strength wise.
Honestly, sorry, just to interrupt. It's not a strength thing. You know what? You'd think that, and the first week of blacksmithing, I was in this shop with guys, 3 times my size. At the end of the first week, we were all basically dead. Our arms were blistering. We felt so sore. And sure, like, a 300-pound guy can swing a sledgehammer better than me. But a lot of it is, muscle memory and being precise. So you could totally be a blacksmith.
Different set of muscles too, I imagine.
Yeah.
Like a lot of things.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I have a friend who does a little bit of smithing in her spare time, so maybe I'll
Cool. Yeah.
go look over her shoulder.
Definitely worth it.
Now, do you with the creative process and the sort of like literal forging with blacksmithing, which looks like a kind of magic to me, is that something that you've worked into your books at all, sort of as like a subtext, or?
It's in this series, down the line in the future, so I won't say anything more than that. I have always wanted to write a book that really takes my knowledge of that kind of and really puts it in the book, especially because I see books and movies doing it so wrong, like hilariously wrong. Like, that scene in Lord of the Rings where they pour molten metal into sword forms? It's not how you make a sword, not even close.
Like,
or when they
aren't you
stick
supposed to fold it or something?
You're supposed to, well, not to get too technical here, but like forging metal and casting metal are two very different things. If you cast metal, it has a really big clunky grain structure and it can just break on you, basically. But
not for swords.
not for swords, exactly.
Gotcha.
So while it's not in there as metaphorically, I do touch on forging, I think, occasionally in the later books. And it's something I've wanted to work into series more in depth.
Oh, that's really cool. I that's one of my other questions I usually gravitate towards, is when I find someone has like another creative interest. It's like, okay, so what scene in which movie was the worst for you to watch?
Yeah.
So sort of going back to your book series, how many books are planned in the series so far? At least you have the end in sight, right? Like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
What other projects are you working on? Do you have other literary work that you're doing right now?
I do. So I have this book that I'm very excited about that I started writing. So the goal with this, and this is just, books take you places. So this book was supposed to be a close friendship between two women that then accidentally turned into a romance. And I love where it's going. And I think what I may try to do with this is, because it's a standalone, so it's not, a big series, and it's not as broad in scope as BRIGHTSHADE and Tales of Aether and Soul. So I actually would like to see about maybe branching into traditional publishing with it. I haven't quite decided yet, but it's about a quarter written, so we'll see.
That's exciting. I think a lot of authors are sort of taking a more hybrid approach. I noticed a lot of traditional authors who I'm friends with are now sort of stepping back and trying their hand at indie publishing, sort of with that built platform behind them, but also in reverse too, because so many of us have built this platform ourselves, and it's like, well, like, I am marketable, so don't you want me? But yeah, I think it's really fun to see people piece those two very different worlds, because they are very different, together. And it does seem like, it's like, oh, well, this series will be indie and this series will be, or this, standalone in your case will be traditional or whatever.
Mhm.
So it's exciting. The querying
Yeah.
process is awful, but yeah.
Yeah, so I've heard. So grow some tough skin and yeah.
Um, but I mean, that it sounds like it's one of those stories that they're looking for even more now. I'd read it.
Sounds great to me.
I've
I
been
hope
watching
so, yeah.
the little ticker at the bottom of your website, and I'm like, I wonder what this one is. So I had to ask.
That, yeah, it's a mystery project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less of a mystery now, I guess.
Yes.
So obviously you have this cast of 5 characters, with lots of side characters too. Do you have a favorite?
Hmm. Is it wrong if I say they're all my favorite for different reasons?
It's like asking a parent, like, oh, so who's your favorite child?
Yeah. No, I don't have a favorite. I think Jenna is dear to me because, in a sense, really is her story.
Mhm.
And in a sense, I did put a lot of myself in her, even though she has some aspects that are very much not my own character.
Mhm.
Um, and because I think some of her experiences, I mean, try not to spoil things here. I think some of her experiences, even if we don't empathize with the actual experience, some of the emotions and some of the helplessness, and some of the strength in her, we also feel, or at least I feel. So I really identify with that.
I think that's really important too, and I think that's sort of something that as writers we have to tap into, and in order to make an authentic character, even if it is an experience that maybe we haven't had, because it's magical or whatever other series of reasons we just
Mm-hmm.
haven't had it. And that, interestingly, that was something that I was struggling with one of my characters, was like I couldn't get into her head, and I thought it was because we were too different, and then I realized it's because like that was a place I didn't want to go in my own head.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as I was like, all right, we got to go in, get the
Yeah.
machete. um, that's then she really blossomed and came to life, and I could actually write her.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's not, like I obviously don't have magical powers. you know, my
Yeah.
family wasn't killed in a massacre, but thank God. But some of those feelings of isolation or whatever, we do experience, and those are, it's like why we write and why we read. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
I
awesome.
think with Jenna in particular, one of the things I like is that she shows so many facets of that, right? Like you have on one hand kind of the negative feelings and a sense of loneliness and helplessness more. I think loneliness is probably more on Adrian's side.
Mhm.
But the other hand, you have this really strong sense of family with her as well, with her husband, and then just like a sense of strength with how powerful she feels despite not being able to walk most of the time.
Yeah. And I also, like, side note that you brought it up, I also love that she has a love interest and an established relationship,
Mm-hmm.
because that's also something we don't see a lot for disabled characters, or if we do, it's in the case of like You Before Me, um,
Okay.
which is like hard pass. It's sort of like this, the disabled person is just the inspiration for the main character, who's the living
Oh,
one.
okay.
And which is the whole other can of worms. But
Yep.
I just love that you can see her in this just so sweet, supportive relationship. And I like their first interaction on page, so like I cried.
Mm-hmm.
So
Aw,
so good job.
that's so validating to
Yeah.
hear.
Because of that, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I see that in my own life now, but that's not
Mm-hmm.
something that you see a lot, especially on page. And I think that's something we need to see. So
I struggle with that a little bit, to be honest, just because I think there's a fine balance between Castor supporting Jenna and then um, Jenna not being able to do things for herself, which she obviously can. Because I think there is a bit of a tendency throughout the book of Castor to just go along with Jenna and kind of do what she wants. So that is something I found a little bit difficult to balance, but yeah, sounds like it worked out okay.
and I think too, like that's an authentic struggle that like
Mhm.
relationships have. It's like, oh
Yeah.
well, you want to take care of each other, but also like you don't want to baby someone, even if they are completely able-bodied. You
Yeah.
don't like, leave me alone, I can do it myself.
Totally.
So yeah, I think that probably is a good thing too, to show, because we all have that kind of baggage sometimes. So
Hmm. Fair enough.
yeah. So the second book is coming out hopefully this
Yes.
fall. at the time of this recording. So, so where can people find you and, see more of your work?
The biggest way to find me currently is on Instagram, because that's where I update things most regularly. It's devolved a little bit from me about my book, and it just it encompasses all the art I do. So you'll see some forging, some drawing, and newly you'll see me renovating my van on there. So, it has a bit of different stuff, but that's just where I post most regularly. You can also find me on Facebook, Miriam R. Dumitra, and on my website, it's the same, miriamrdumitra.com, I believe. So especially on the website, you'll see which books are currently up and for sale, and you'll see a progress report on my books. So you can kind of see how far am I with writing and editing.
And I'm just going to keep refreshing the progress report.
Yeah.
So sorry, I just digressed here. You're renovating your van? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I bought a van which I'm converting into a camper to live in while I'm at university. Yeah.
That is so cool. I'm in the process of building a tiny house.
So wild. That's awesome.
That's why I'm like, wait, tell me more. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I mean, essentially a camper, so.
Yeah, that's sweet.
We'll have to trade tips. So
yes.
Exciting. What are you going to university for, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm there for theater. So I do the technical aspects of theater, kind of lights and sound. I'm hoping to get into some design and take some more writing courses as well.
That's really cool. Well, that's definitely very exciting. I think that's about all the time we have. But it was awesome to talk to you finally.
Yeah, I'm so glad it worked out.
My new favorite characters. So, and definitely keep us updated with your projects as they come along.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and I'm a lot less nervous now.
Yes. Yeah, everyone says that. It's like, just talk. We're fine.
It's good.
Well, this has been the Amphibian Press podcast, and I'm Sarah, and with me today was Miriam Dumitra, a fantasy author, and be sure to follow her, and I'll put all those links in the description. So, thank you for listening.